We also have social health services, creative office spaces, and retail. There's definitely an interest in kind of studying the interior and exterior public spaces and those urban spaces in between. Looking again at 210,000 square foot program, 60,000 square feet of public commercial program. We have 50,000 square feet of creative flexible office space, and 100,000, which is about half of it, is housing and hotel. Small component is a transient hotel and a boutique hotel, but we also, half of that program is affordable housing, and then there's also a small component of high mid-income housing. And then there's also transitional family housing. That's really to create this sort of multi-income, very diverse mixed use environment. And also 210,000 square feet is given to the public spaces. And then there's about a 1-story underground for parking. The location this year is Echo Park. Just has had its own struggles, both in terms of its own gentrification over the years, but also the treating of homeless people in the local community, not by the local community, but by the city itself. Has an interesting sort of play. We're very close to that location. We're here on the corner of Echo Park Ave and Sunset. Sunset's definitely been gentrifying, particularly over up in this direction, but it's more of a mixed use commercial space that's being developed, much more residential as you move up into the hills. We're sort of straddling between those, but it's a very prominent corner. This kind of gives you an idea of the visuals of that kind of corner, you know, with sort of a local kind of cultural colorization of the buildings. This is where we are, is right by this Walgreens, and there's a organic food store that we're removing all existing buildings. There's a few of them on this tract, and we're taking over this entire block. It's mainly a parking lot right now. And this is, so it's a residential neighborhood in the back. The street, of course, is Sunset and pedestrian urban environment. There's a school over here as well. And I should just also say, again, it's about 300 square feet by 325 square feet. The lot itself is 110,000 square feet. And we're going up 4 stories max to the 45-foot maximum of the local community. 3 things we try to keep our eye on: architectural concept, form and material interest, an urban concept, a way of strategizing the site, and also using organizational programmatic concept that kind of helps you develop a sort of a socio-political agenda that the students will articulate where appropriate. So I'm going to stop and say thank you to all for being here and turn over to Anne. And generally we run about 25 minutes per student. We have 4 students.
Okay. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, thank you everyone for coming today to give us a review. My name is Anne, and this is my project, Paris Hills. So initially, when I studied this site, I became aware of the very different dynamics of the 4 street corners that Stephen mentioned earlier. And I decided to create 3 central hubs they can see in this diagram over here. So I would have the market hub in that corner of Sunset, and then housing hub in the Echo, and then business hub in the very back. During my design process, first I connected these hubs with a circulation path, and then extruded volumes with courtyards, and sunk the whole site a level lower by creating a sunken ground level. My goal was to promote a pedestrian-centric environment and to invite people into the project through the process of descending down into the courtyard to feel like a different physical and visual experience that could be gained by that. And so this is my ground floor plan, and you can see that there is a circular ramp that goes down into that sunken courtyard over here, surrounding a kind of marketplace that can be used for farmers market, a stramp going over here along the housing hub, and an occupiable stair court for the business hub area. So this is my program, and the blue in the back represents the office, and the oranges in the front are the housing. Instead of separating the different housing into like a low income housing building and a high income housing building into separate areas, I decided to mix them all up in an effort to like desegregate these spaces based on income level. In the middle of the pink, there is a transient hotel. and the yellow is the boutique hotel, and the dark blue is the public spaces on the ground level. For this project, I was interested in prefab modular housing units that are based on this 12 by 12 block. These additional elements can be added on, such as the shading element and the staircase element, to create a variety of different spaces such as these. And these range from 300 to 1,400 square feet. So this is a typical 300 or 400 square feet, 1-bedroom or studio unit. And it just shows the different multifunctional furniture that are used to maximize the small space. And then here you can kind of see the view going into the housing hub. And this is a section that shows how these units can configure and stack and connect to each other. And in this axis, you can see that how the housing units are stacked to create a terracing manner that faces down into the housing hub, which is right here. These terracing of these units create these outdoor spaces along the building that activates the roof space and invites visual and social interaction. And as you can see, by using the staircase, you can continue to go up. The bridging platform over here connects the housing structure to the other housing structure at the front of Sunset. And the staircase also connects to the office building. Oh, and then there's a restaurant and a grocery market on that sunken ground level. So these are my floor plans. This is the underground parking, and there's a sunken theater space that you can see in this section a little bit clearer later. On my ground level, I have the most public spaces, the restaurants, the retail, pharmacy, and grocery market. And then here in the middle is a transit hotel. And this is the lobby space and the social service and health center. So this is the second and third levels, or sorry, first and second level. So, and there's the transit hotel in the middle. And then along the street front is the retail spaces and restaurants and cafes, the housing that's stacking up, and the office on this side. Sorry, it's a little slow. On the third and fourth level are the boutique hotels right here along the facade of the office building. And then there are more office programs over here. And then over here, there's a community space for the housing over here. And then this is the final floor plan that has the rest of the housing and office spaces. So the top section shows that axonometric we shot earlier, but in a longitudinal cut. And it shows that kind of that sunken level right here, the staircase of the housing hub, and all the units that are looking into the housing hub. The bottom section shows that sunken theater that has sunlight coming from the south, and the ramp, the circular ramp with the market in the center, and the the office spaces along the side of along right here, and kind of a courtyard space for the office. And then this is the other section that cuts through the housing structure and the circular ramp. And this is on the right is a render of the housing hub. On the left is a render from one of the courtyards of the housing structure looking up. On the left is from the top level of the boutique hotel looking down towards the housing hub and the transient hotel. And then on the right is the transient hotel. And on the left is the staircase that connects the housing structure to the office building, and kind of the office building with the occupiable stair court that descends down into that sunken level, and an overall view on the right. Yeah, thank you for listening. Should I share the concept board as well, or does okay? I don't hear you, Stephen, but I saw you.
I have it. So
Yeah, I was thinking this looks good.
The link is in the chat, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
fun.
we've got it.
yeah, I opened it on the screen to look at. Is this the last year, Stephen?
We're fourth years and we have a final year next
Oh,
year.
okay.
Yeah, this
Coming
is our
into
fourth
thesis.
year. It's a 20-week studio, so it's 2 quarters for us,
Oh,
which is a little bit more than your typical semester, but not by much.
it's a very comprehensive program. That's what I mean. It's just very complex and it's great.
Do you have, and I may have missed it at the beginning because I was scrambling to try to get a bunch up, but maybe you could go over what it is beyond the purposes of the class, which are, I agree, incredibly comprehensive and trying to cover a lot of disparate program pieces, not, not just the quantity of the program, but the kind of potential interactions and separations necessary. I think it's an interesting problem statement to try to drive all these pieces together. And given the nature of the site as it exists, it's the kind of the urbanization of that site within the kind of existing context. If I look at your site plan, I can see there's potential grain similarities that relate to both the small grain and large grain kind of components of the context. But beyond all that, beyond what the program is, if you were starting this again, what would you say you were trying to do?
I guess one of the main goals of my project is to have this very social roofscape that I started off with in my previous project for the low-rise housing competition. I wanted to activate the roof space and have a very connected community for the residents that live there. So if I had the opportunity to start over, I guess really kind of retry this project again, I want to push more of that kind of element to not just the housing, but to the office level as well.
I think a quick critique, I agree. And then so what it lets me do is look for which image supports what you just said. And I think that the second from the bottom image on the extreme right is the one that probably illustrates that the best, even though the axos, at the upper and lower right, upper left and lower right corners would try to do that. I think conceptually, they actually talk much more about the, or at least illustrate the issue of the compartmentalization of the programs, where the roofscape could have been a piece that tied in terms of how each sequestered program piece, by the time it got to the roofscape, was a collective sense of space. But if I look at the axos right now, even the typologies are so clearly distinguished. And that's kind of why I asked, were you taking a position where each of these disparate program pieces was maintaining their own formal, morphological, or kind of manifestation of what their program is, the kind of iconography of a program piece, and having them occupy a portion of the site, and then by collecting them on one site, was that the relationship? But it sounds more like you were trying to get everything up to this roofscape where everything could kind of be informed by the complexities, and then have that socialization occur on that upper roof. I think that's really noble, and I think it's a great pursuit. And I think that second image from the bottom on the right starts to show the possibilities of that whatever is happening programmatically within each of these boxes that are, the diversity of the program is interesting, but at some point they start to create a dither on the roofscape, which I think is kind of interesting, even especially in the section. I think one of your strongest drawings is your section by far, but I think it actually talks more about the contiguity of the floor plane than it does about the roof.
Just also, I think I just want to reiterate what has been said as well, that I think that one thing that would like to hear a little bit more about is the kind of a formal concept, the formal ambitions, because there are some in here that were very, very clearly trying to introduce something along the Sunset, which is very different from along the Montana Street. And my question is that is there a clear conceptual ambitions how this project was trying to actually develop? I mean, looking at a lot of different vignettes that you proposed, so there are very, very clear ambitions, and I think they were more successful when you focus on the kind of small scale. At each vignette, you begin to be able to identify the a set of ambitions that you're trying to accomplish. However, when we are looking at the kind of overall project, one could see that there are very, very clear separation between each object. But if that is an ambition for you that you wanted to actually allow them to be quite different, I think that also not very clear because they were quite similar, yet not very uh, clear about the lineage of this form that is coming from. For example, I think that the whole idea about the terracing, the roofing, I would love to see a little bit more integration of the roof of the office tower, for example, and how the office seems to be quite different in terms of the language and the way how the frame. You haven't talked a lot about the structure and the material of it, but it feels like there's a lot of different things that is happening in the office building that seem to compromise a lot of your ambitions formally. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been nice, like the aggregation that's going on with the residential side and how that kind of manifests to the roof as being a goal of yours. I think that the whole roof discussion and the social activity of the roof being a through line across all the complex program and all the difficulties that Stephen put in front of you could have been a nice way to kind of say all of the roofs are doing social things in different ways. So you can still keep the difference between the programs, between the office and the residential and the hotel, but just continue to invent things in your own terms in terms of how that roof is playing out. So I think to me, that's where like the office one kind of missed a little bit, right? It could have been you could have taken the aggregation and maybe manipulated it in a way and changed it to the office user, but still kind of slowly, ate away parts of the top of the office building or something like that to start to bring back in that aggregation again. It's also very interesting that it like really ties to Echo Park kind of hilly scape as you move through some of the bungalows and houses up in Echo Park. It has this kind of circuitous kind of path moving through the project, which could be kind of a nice thing to explore a little bit more as well. Yeah, that's kind of been my thing, as everyone's been saying, is that the office could have been manipulated in a way that maybe ties more to your kind of goals initially with the project. And I think, when you come up with, you focus on what typology and living units and what those are and what that can be, and it's very clear that that's an architectural concept for a residential thing. I think when you start to exchange program within that, it starts to find ways that the office is kind of doing that. There's other moments in the office that can be similar to the house and break apart into aggregated units as well, right? There can be social moments, relaxed moments. It doesn't have to be just general space, which is what's modeled here, is the big massive building. So you can continue to kind of break down that building. I think collectively, then you would get this really interesting kind of just an extension of the language that you have already started towards the more residential side of the site.
Yeah, you play a lot of the kind of promenade and the vertical circulation. So you use a lot of this kind of vertical circulation to really reinvent the type of formal language of your project. I think that I think you could continue that in the area where you find a condition that for example, the outdoor indoor possibility of that office space. So I think that the program of office now is also quite different from traditional way of thinking about office tower. So I think that you could begin to actually digest a little bit more of the kind of type of office, office type of program that you would like to propose in this kind of different vision of this office space, for example, and allow those formal language like the promenade, the kind of outdoor, indoor, the staircases and things like that, to begin to play a little bit more role in that, because I don't think that you're intended to make them quite different. That is not a concept. I think that sometimes you could have a concept of really begin to find a lot of different juxtaposition of different form, but I don't think you are intended to do that. And so I think that you could begin to see a little bit more seamlessly. I like that the framing that you did in the office on the sunset side. I don't know how I can point it out in the render. Let me see. Yeah, in the last render on the left side, the first render on the left side, I can at the bottom, left bottom. It seems like when you look at that type of vignette, it looks like you actually have some idea how to actually fully integrate it, both program and the function, both program and form. I think that it just seemed odd that it ended there, and the last two story was completely different. And the tower on the side that were shown in the larger vignette in the left hand, in the right side below, it's also allowed the kind of distinction, make them a little bit different. Make them to become separate.
And I get the sense that you were on that track, as the other jurors have identified. There's, I think from a cultural standpoint, you much more clearly express those objectives in that first, I think, as Frank pointed out, those two axos. So I think I would just add my, my 2 cents the same, just to reinforce what the other jurors indicated, to just push that. And it seems, and I think that's what you mentioned, you would be interested in pushing, if you were to continue this project, your ideas about developing the roofscapes. Is that what you said, Anne?
Yeah. If I had an opportunity, I would like to move into that office building and start working on that.
I think that you could integrate the points that my co-jurors made about expanding some of the morphological language that you've explored in the housing, using and also and adhering to your original goals. I think that you're on that track, you're on the way. But it struck me how you described your project, that you were interested in this this kind of interaction that would from a larger social and cultural standpoint begin to identify some of the barriers that some of the, let's say, residents in the transient hotel, visitors to the transient hotel, and some of the barriers that that residents in in some of those housing units might face. And so it seems to me that that kind of cultural language could also be extended to align with the typological and morphological vocabulary that you've already begun to explore in the housing, but in in the office piece and in the hotel piece, the boutique hotel particularly. So I think that, from the standpoint of housing and programmatic standpoint of housing and office spaces, hotel spaces, I think that you can continue to build on that, on some of those, cultural implications, the social implications that you emphasized and which resonate, and which clearly, and that are clearly expressed in the project and those other pieces. So yeah, I was imagining how these objectives, these goals that you've set out to meet can actually be reached. With a little bit more time, a little bit more pushing, but it's really impressive nonetheless that I was really impressed that you decided from the outset to, integrate the various kinds of housing, the lower income and higher income housing. So, that kind of a strategy can also be applied to rethinking, as Ravi Varma pointed out, the office space, office space, offices which are being sort of redefined. And so the whole, the larger cultural implications of what office work implies and, vis-a-vis housing can be really interestingly explored. And you're doing that, you're on that track. So thanks. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit of comment here. Earlier when Frank was talking about the section and maybe, his other comment about, if you know what the central statement of your work is, hopefully you also can provide a few central images that really speaks to the main idea, right? And so if there's a story arc here about roofscape, I'm kind of looking, I'm looking at some of your renders and I'm looking for clues as to, whether or not the roofscape is really articulated. And I have a couple of observations that maybe I'll come back and tie it up at the very end. But before I do that, I think the second section in the middle of the image, in the middle of your board, I'm talking about. I don't know if I can annotate this section, right? Where you show an auditorium cut through, seemingly between and underneath other programs that are also in your project, which speaks to me about an interest in, let's say, the diversity of program and the diversity of the program being mixed as let's say hybridized as possible, if that makes sense. But juxtaposing that with, maybe the facade articulation, I feel like there might have been an opportunity for the diversity to also be expressed in the renders. I think the monotony where the whitewashing of every program, to me, I think, yes, that's a strategy. I mean, if the accented differentiations are still visible despite the monomateriality or monocolor, then you might have had a moment that you struck success, right? But then I feel like, in a battle where you don't really have a lot of arsenal to work with to kind of communicate this type of programmatic diversity, maybe material or color diversity could be a really good way to help you reinforce this kind of idea of mixing. But maybe talking a bit more about the render itself, what gets accented really well in the render is this beige line work, right? So the structural members are beige. The roofscape, ultimately becomes also line work in beige. Whereas, when we hear the word roofscape, at least in my mind, I'm thinking about a surface, which is kind of like an XY situation. Yours is maybe like an X or Y situation, where the surfaces have been turned into, the scape has been really turned into lines as opposed to scapes, if that makes sense. So in which case, I think, it's really like, if you present it any differently, like I think, I wouldn't be looking for surfaces. I would maybe be very happy with lines instead of surfaces. But because I was looking for surfaces and I see lines, I found myself perplexed. Well, anyway, I think just to kind of like send you off on a happy summer, I do want you to know it is really impressive. The drawings are really impressive. That section that I highlighted is super nice. And I think, there's a lot of, let's say, DNA embedded in that section that cannot be taken away. And I think there's probably a very great future development in your body of work based on that section.
I think continuing on that, I think the whole thing does read like a really, it talks about the complexity of the project, which is sometimes you can kind of hide those things in the way you draw it, but I think this actually exposes how much is going on, which is kind of fun to be able to actually capture that and share that within the course of the project. So as you see everything come together, it's like we're seeing all of the stuff that went into it a little bit, and it's kind of all there. So again, good approach of graphically and within the renders and the drawings, tying that all together, and kind of carrying the complexity of the project, and keeping that alive, I guess, throughout all the drawings, and not kind of, you zoom into some of those sections or some of those detailed sections where there's stuff inside the walls, or you get into the floor plans, there's a bunch of detail there. So I think there's a lot of kind of background work that's filled in that's really supporting that complexity as well. So just really good job on that.
So we're gonna move to the next one, but Anne, I just wanted to, of course, thank you for being such a hardworking, diligent, and capable student. And you've done such a lovely job with this project. You have a certain sensibility, which has come up in your earlier work too. So I applaud that effort. I think it was a really, really interesting critique that you received. Mostly that the hotel just needed some serious work, but I also think in a way we take on so much in this class, and perhaps this year we focused a little bit more on housing than we did on the hotel, on the commercial spaces, the commercial needing to improve. And I was thinking, like, I've sat in on Clay's reviews up in Oregon, and that was like almost your agenda, right? To completely rethink commercial use space. And I think this aggregate concept that you're working on will readily explore that and totally transform the way we think about how someone could work in a creative office space environment. And that would really lend a nice mixing. Also, maybe in the groundscape too, the relationships between these designated objects, which do have lovely roofscapes, especially the one at the far left top corner, which really is beautiful on the top. So there's a lot to learn, and you've accomplished so much, and it's really very, very impressive. So thank you for everything you've done this year.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone for giving me a wonderful review today.
Great. So we're going to move on. I think, Kate, are you next?
Yes.
Okay. And Joe joined us from the phone. Now he's in here. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Alrighty, can everyone see my screen? Okay. Hi, so my name is Kate Black, and I'd like to start my presentation by thanking all of the panelists for your time today. This is my project, Clear Boundaries Are Hard to Find. So in my project proposal, I was interested in minimizing the building's footprint on the ground level to allow for greater open area and green spaces. And in the upper levels, I wanted to work to bridge and connect the program so that it forms a cohesive mass. And so my goal was that by implementing various landscaping material and formal moves, I could attempt to blur lines between private, public, and semi-public spaces in order to create larger collectives among the vast problematic types. So because of the relative separation of the ground floor figures, special attention was paid to cultivating in between spaces that were conducive to various programs. A shared space between the bookstore and restaurant allows for an overlap of users who have typically been separated, while the exterior utilized various soft and hardscaping methods to avoid having too large of an unprogrammed central courtyard, as seen in the plan here. So the blue annotates green spaces, while the yellow and pink shows specific hardscaping. So by allowing the building's facade material to not simply terminate at the ground, but continue as an extension, the program could be designated to areas outside of just those imposed by walls. In the example of the restaurant with outdoor dining pictured here, the designated space is able to reach towards the common courtyard in the center without causing a permanent boundary to be required. This same method is applied to the market hub so that it can be expanded upon outside of its walls to allow for additional stalls or food trucks. So on a more personal and private scale, in the transient hotel, I opted to create a more communal space than is typically provided in standard hotels. Because of the location of the site and recent displacement of homeless individuals in Echo Park, I wanted the hotel to offer an area for communal gathering and support. The hotel is placed near the market and vertical farm hub so that individuals who are facing food insecurity can have access to fresh produce and other goods. So in terms of citing the programmatic types, I was careful to consider what types of space might benefit from having visibility between each other, and how users' needs might require closer relationship between specific pieces. So the daycare is situated in between the retail and restaurant side and the creative office. And this allows for children who are waiting for a table at the restaurant to have a space to play. And on the other side allows for easy drop-off of workers' children's and potential for them to be able to see their children while working. So the inclusion of a vertical farm stems from a goal to allow for a more closed system to be able to exist within the project. The goods produced via the farm can be utilized to support the various users, restaurants, grocery stores, and local farmers market that's within walking distance. And then the compost and waste collected on site can in turn be reused in the farm to help support the closed cycle. And here's just a more overall view of how some micro housing units, how the vertical farm, and how the market and food court come together. And so by using a translucent material for the facade, there's a slight layer of privacy, yet it still allows for a blurred image to be observed by those outside. This allows for a certain level of inherent movement. The polycarbonate panels used along the facade are hinged and can be slid to let in more light, or pulled out to make more privacy. And so by having facade elements that can be freely changed depending on users' needs, the facade itself serves as a changing face for the building. In my more zoomed in section, I explored relating the market, food hub, and grocery store in one large space. I used the vertical farm as a central figure that ties them together and played with slight changes and floor level to provide a separation that exists but still provides visibility to the neighboring spaces. And then, so the form allows for a certain level of blurring and lessens the harsh vertical divisions between distinct programmatic elements. Was my hope, at least by doing that. And then, yeah, these are the last two. And then I can go to my concept board.
I'm sure the concept boards seeing that as really is nice, to be honest.
I think looking at the concept board directly, the resolution by being able to zoom in on some of these it's totally worth it.
Yeah, my point was that in the PowerPoint, it's you can't really, you can control it more by going back and forward. Personal opinion.
Oh, okay. I can go back to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think your thesis works? Is that you said you hope at the end? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it works in pieces, in parts. Unfortunately, I wish I could have gotten the amount of resolution in some parts that I didn't quite get in others.
Clay, you go ahead, but I have a question.
No, go for it, Frank.
So um, I'm like a little blown away, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. I'm trying not to go off on too many tangents here, which is a problem. But the first is I'm trying to maybe to get even to Clay's question, to be able to see the project for what it is and what it does versus for how seductive it is. And so in order to do that, this quote comes to mind from John Lautner, who I had the displeasure to know personally. And he would deliberately not draw well. He would use a carpenter's pencil to draw so as not to be seduced in the process of making a building by the drawing. He thought that the building was what was important and its ultimate resolution. I cannot work that way. So I immediately, it's not that I disagree with it, but there was a moment where I realized that if I made beautiful things, the ultimate thing would be beautiful. That all along the way, I tried to make beautiful things. And when I look at your project, there was a moment as I would look at the spaces and how they were relating to each other. And I was trying to expunge the visuals from that analysis to just see how this section was working and how the people were coming together. And then to let the qualities that you're adding to it, the personalities that you're giving it. And I just find it that much more, and I don't know what it is, but there's certain references of, for example, the way that these, and I'm looking on your board, but I can mark it up on here, the way these things are doing this, like a conventional roofing system, but not like a conventional roofing. They're basically rafters. And so the way that you're using the language of architecture, but bending it around to fit your section, I think is one of the more admirable things that you're doing, beyond all the admirable things that are immediately evident. And so that's what I was saying, is when I tried to take the style out of it, other things actually start to show up. The one thing I'm going to quit because there's so much more to say. I want to leave some room for other folks. But the one thing I do notice is in your pursuit up until this point, you've been very clear about the definition of each of these pieces as separate colored buildings. And I think it's an interesting urbanistic approach to understand that that's the way urbanism potentially works, is not by a mixing of programs, but by a juxtaposition of them. And even the way you talk about locating things next to each other so that they could inform each other. But in the end, I see this, or I don't know if this is the end or the beginning model, when it's all rendered as one piece, I don't know that I like it better or more, but I think it does make me question what is your ultimate pursuit. The aggregation of separate building types, each of which contributes to a greater whole, or a block-wide identity done only by you. And that's maybe just some way to think about this. I'll leave you. I'm just in awe of this section, though. I was looking at it on concept boards. I'll leave some room for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, it's a pleasure to see the work and to get involved in this conversation. I like your project quite a bit, and I share Frank's sense of kind of reading it either as, I think, six larger pavilions, or as a kind of piece of urban fabric in its entirety. And I guess my question to you is going to be on architectural vocabulary more than urbanism. I'm interested in these kind of filleted pavilions. They're not, for what it's worth, you're not alone in Los Angeles in that obsession. The Crossroads of the World is worth a visit when you're on, I think it's Crossroads of the World is on Sunset, kind of really mid Hollywood. It was designed by William Dara in the 1920s, and it's a series of pavilions that have been deco curved into a mania, a bit like, not quite the same mania as yours. But it's interesting to me that language and the kind of generosity of kind of repetitive curvature and the degree to which it delivers a lot of difference relatively quickly, and with some economy, and with that crazy mansarded vertical garden, actually some real possibilities, is, I think, really winning. Actually, Gary's library in Hollywood has a bit of this too. And I do think that I got a glimpse of the first project, and I'm kind of getting my wits about me more here, but it seems to me that having a clear having a clear architectural strategy for creating and amplifying difference may be as critical as having a firm command of the kind of larger urbanistic demands of this project. Because without delving deep into your plans, I have a feeling it was a little tricky to sort everything you've been asked to deal with into these 6 relatively similar sized. I mean, what all the filleting hides is how similar your 6 volumes are. And so I get my question, I think, is in terms of looking more carefully at the project would be, how have you distributed it 6 ways, and why were they so evenly scaled in the first place? Did that let me just ask you, why are they so similar in scale, your parts?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. It was really kind of difficult originally because I've never like worked with a project with this scale before. So trying to wrap my head around like all of these like really large pieces, and they all felt really important, if that makes sense. And so I didn't want to have like smaller versions of things. And like the office, at first it was like really large and it was way bigger than everything, but that just felt like it was overshadowing the pieces that I wanted to stand out. And so I guess I just wanted emphasis to be placed on every part of the project instead of just the vertical farm standing apart of everything else, because it's like this whole system, and that's what I was interested in these buildings working together. And so I felt like they were all players that worked together, and I didn't want them to overshadow each other.
I thought that that's what's very, very skillful. I think it's your skill that you actually be able to combine very, very complex program and allow the building to be read in the kind of at the urban scale in such a way that they are working together. You have formal skill, definitely. The model was really, I thought it was really beautiful. But I have a comment about the language of it that was more of a kind of carving and sculpting, subtracting. So that is the kind of formal language that you are trying to do. And so there are some moments that I thought was really, really, really well done. Is the combination of these 2 color that seamlessly trying to combine. I need to actually use the annotation just a second. So something like this that is happening, with the 2 color that will try to combine in a particular corner and a particular part of the form. But then there's like what Frank was talking about, the kind of combination of this curve, allow light to come in a certain area. The type of openness that was interior, that was actually completely in another language, but you also play like you're putting it in mostly more of a kind of interior surfaces or interior facade, which is a lot more of a kind of addition, not a kind of sculpting. So you just attach on. One attach on that I think I still have a little bit more of a problem with was this kind of bay window. I mean, that was, the rest were very sophisticated, I just wonder where this bay window coming in, and what kind of language that you're trying to, those are things that was, those protrusion of the fenestration that you're trying to do were really beautiful, were very well done. So when I look at this kind of building, I have this very, very similar kind of, what do you call it? There's an argument inside of you, just like what Frank was talking about. It's just, in a way, it's such a beautiful model. And what you're now trying to think about is that how is this building going to be built in such a way that actually allow the form to be celebrated, rather than how is this type of building should be read in a more homogeneous way, not tectonically, right? You don't want them to be read like material was read so clearly in such a way that we know how it's built. In a way, it needs to be a little bit more mysterious about how it's really built. how the surface is actually seamlessly linked together. So I think that it's need another technique of construction. You know what I mean? It's not an expressive way of allow all of the material to be legible, but how do you actually allow them to be a little bit less clear, less obvious, but the form become a lot more forefront. So I have problem with some of the detail that you draw that were just so what do you call explicitly post or beam or cladding and things like that, but allow them to, you know, you need to think about material in this project a little bit differently. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's a really interesting comment, Ravi, because as you're saying this, my mind went to New Mexico, because, you know, like Adobe construction is something that maybe this type of formal language can withstand, but the details of Adobe construction almost always, actually always, the kind of sharp corners become softened because of the construction technique, right, with the cladding technique. But so if this is not Adobe, if it's concrete or stucco, you know, like I think, you know, if it's concrete, I guess, you know, it's, then the logic is a well, then a subtractive logic. But if it's added, no, it's a really great question, because you know, you don't really want to think about how sharp the corners are or how seamless these things are. Like I think if it's masonry, you might result in a let's say kind of surface condition with some kind of grid or kind of panelization. But so no, I mean at the scale of the model where you're rendering the project as a physical model, we can still imagine this in Bristol boards or something like that, in which case we don't need to worry about these things. But I think it's such a good question to ask from Ravi.
I think that's such a fascinating point that both Ravi and Jimenez are making. And it's something that Kate has been working on for the past 2 quarters, whether she knows it or not. And that's the image as material. Even if we go back to her low-rise submission, she was printing wood textures on the exterior elevations of buildings. And I think maybe that is one point of critique that I would make, is that the framing system, which is visible, might not be exactly the most appropriate detailing system for Kate's project in particular. Not saying that what she's done is very elegant in a different sense. But I think maybe even thinking of the brick pattern as being a veneer of a very thin materiality, which then obfuscates a different material system entirely. And I think maybe the issue is we do have to see it in this case. But I wonder if there's a different approach were she to revise this project.
I have a counterpoint to the critique of the framing system, but I'll save it in case we have time. Then I do think it's appropriate, but somebody else should go.
Well, I'm going to jump into, because we love this project and obviously we want to talk about it. And there's something really important, but also something really problematic happening within it. It's beautiful, no offense or buts. Gorgeous project from beginning to end. The thing that I'm challenged by is it's kind of like what Frank suggested. How does the coloration, the materialization, the rendering, the drawing belie reality to make us love something that when I actually look at it closely, I'm going to point out something that just disturbs me. None of the bedrooms have windows. Most of the living rooms don't have windows. There are practically no windows in any of the living spaces when I start to look at a 40-foot wall of pink, right? And I kind of go, I love the dormer. It's very Harry Potter. It's super perfect a way to like manage your way through that system. You have answers to it, Even the way you managed, I think the urban farm, which I didn't like at first, but once I saw it wasn't the whole building, I loved it. You know, it's opposite of the way that one would think to do it, and that makes kind of some interesting sense. You have the skills, but somehow the desire to make it all a pink brick building, which I actually say I love it. I love it. And if it got built, it would be amazing. Would it be too much like candy? I don't know. But it doesn't have any, it doesn't satisfy certain reality checks. Like once I go into the living spaces in the plan, and you actually are very smart, Kate, and I'm sorry to call it out like this. There are very few plans, right? Because it's very savvy. You don't want to show them, you know, because you don't want to, and I applaud you for that, you know, because it's really brilliant. It's a brilliant project. Yeah, I'm quiet now. I just want to point that out.
But
I
it's-
want to go ahead and respond.
Can I just add one thing? But I think that the project has the kind of germination that one could begin to think about those when you begin to think about that kind of the set of practice, the set of reality, like material. And the other thing is that because it's not a completely pure platonic form, you know, like there's a lot of curving in and out. It's you almost be able to think about when it's curving in, you could actually totally open it up, allow light to come in the form. The surface doesn't have to be all solid. I think that part of it, it's something that the student would need to develop further and think about them that this kind of form allow that kind of concave or the kind of the more internal, the interior to begin to be light, you know, that surface and not totally necessarily need to be always complete its own. And I think that it's something that you'll learn when you begin to think about the practical issues and allow this kind of issue to come into contentions. And the project's going to be stronger rather than weaker, you know, once you really begin to think about a lot of these issues. I don't think the solution, it shouldn't be the bay window, put punching up, but it may be every time you curve the area where it's closing in, it become totally open.
Sorry to, I already spoke, but what does Ricardo Bofill built with? I guess that's kind of, you know, now that I'm thinking about a bunch of construction possibilities, you know, Bofill does it, right? Like Kate's super beautiful language that she's developing. I mean, I'm sure Kate, throughout the semester, she's been looking at Bofill's work, probably. And, you know, I think it seems like a really appropriate person to look into. Even the ways in which windows are dotted on facades, I think, you know, works super well.
Gotta say, I much prefer the massing strategy here to any of Bonfils. I was gonna say what he builds with is dubious politics.
I'm with you.
I think it's just stucco that he's building with, but I was just thinking that the articulation of the materiality of the brick, which is clearly of interest to create a homogeneous exterior, could be dealt with in really interesting ways. Like if you were to print a fritted glass with a brick and deal with all the detailing so that it follows the joint lines of the brick, I think would be an amazingly elegant. You could even have like pink glass, which would be a really exciting way to deal with it.
There's a lot of this cool like dichromatic glass with like the pink tint embedded in it, so it's still clear but has that pink shimmer. But just the whole monochromatic texturing of different things could be a study as well, where you say, I'm doing a pink building, but I'm finding ways to create it out of stucco, pink punches and pink mullions and dichromatic glass, and then pink brick. And then, because circling back to what Frank said, the difference between the monochromatic model and then the 6 separate, you know, objects we have, be nice to start to introduce just a little tiny dissimilarity between some of those objects through that material study, and start to create more of that kind of more richer take on the monochromatic building than just saying it's all one material and it's all one window. I think you can create that homogeneity out of like more pieces essentially.
It's like the 3 little pigs all defer to the last pig.
Kate,
Okay.
So you talked about wanting to free up the footprint to allow as much, I think, outdoor interaction, use of the exterior. So of course I was looking at that, looking for that in your drawings. But I was immediately struck, like the others have mentioned, by the initial image that you shared of your project. And I was immediately, I mean, Jimenez mentioned being transported to New Mexico, and I was transported to Egypt. And I immediately thought of Hassan Fatty's work, which to me operates at once on an architectural and an urbanistic level. And so as far as the the homogeneity, the pink, I saw that. I was impressed by that. And so I sort of intuitively just aligned that with some of the language of architecture that Fatty produced, that you do find in the American Southwest, like in New Mexico, and other parts of the world where those materials are most prominent. And at the same time, I was also seduced by these the sections, particularly those that feature the farm, and so to me, there is this interesting, there's an interesting balance in your project between the graphics, the representational approach that you implement in the project, which is, I think, which comments well on current technologies and I think some of the issues that you wanted to address in terms of the food insecurity and the connection between your, the diagram that you that you provided also between living and housing and food and so on. So I saw in your project a really interesting balance between this more contemporaneous language of representation and at the same time an acknowledgement of other an acknowledgement of other knowledge systems that are a little bit less modern, more traditional, let's say, in the way that Jimenez described it. And so for me, the pink, is like, it's a color, it's a sort of mediary between those two things that you seem to be balancing, the graphic representational language and what you're I think aiming for in your in the morphological language, in the massing that you arrived at. And so the pink, yeah, to me, it does kind of speak of something more current, the candy materials that might approximate some mediation between these two forces. But I mean, there was so much that I was thinking of that many of you already addressed, but I was really, really impressed by it, especially that initial the initial massing the image that you showed us. So thanks very much, just for taking on so much. Yeah.
That's a favorite image too. Look at those curves. It's so well done. Anyway, no, seriously, look at those, like the way you manage that. Not many people can do that so well at all.
Right.
And if someone else wants to have the last word, I don't need to.
Really appreciate the multiplicity of interests of Kate. I think she's executing everything super, super well. And I think it demonstrates a high degree of responsibility of her as a young designer. So thank you so much, Kate.
I just had one thing, and I'll try to do it quickly. I thought that when the Pan Pacific burned and we realized how fake it all was, there was some historical preservation uproar about whether something so artificial should be worthy of preservation, because it was basically a stage set built for a World Expo. And I think one of the critiques a lot of other cultures have of our way of building in Los Angeles is we don't build permanently, that we build out of sticks and plaster, and it's all artifice. No, I happen to live in a place called Venice, which is 100% artifice. And I think it is somewhat appropriate that there's things about this and the way that you're building it that maybe you don't understand yet. And so I hesitate to give you credit for them. But I think within all the critique, there is possibly some ways to navigate the issues that are inherent in the way you're approaching it, that they don't need to be modified, that there's ways of understanding. I think that there's design is sometimes those two things. It's coming up with something you don't quite understand and then not changing it so much, but understanding it more. And I think that that's maybe I think a lot of the critique is pointing to those openings for you that would still need to be justified.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kate. We're gonna move to Juan.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
We have two
Hey,
more.
everybody, this is Juan, and I appreciate coming to our review, and
To share your screen.
yep. So first, I began with my site strategy, borrowing from my formal studies before, where I try to create like this nooks and this pocket of space in between these volumes here. And then I began to like simplify it, and then using this kind of continuing this kind of strategy of like getting this void in between these volumes. And then with this project, I located all the public kind of use of programs like on the bottom, and then distributed all office spaces and other housing units intermixed between levels to intermingle with each other. And then this is like a ground floor plan where you can navigate through. This is like all this office and retail spaces that are distributed within the site. And then this is like a transient hotel and a boutique hotel. A bar here that connects to other levels, and this is second level here where you can kind of navigate through the entire building with like office spaces and residential units that are in between, and then also continuing of a boutique hotel here, and a retail spaces are also included in each level as well, on this level. And then another more housing circulation type of corridors and courtyard spaces in between this housing units as well, that can serve as like a front porch type of situation in between housing units. And then this is another floor where there's just another more of a residential units that are located in the project. And then this is the entrance that you can enter from Sunset and Echo Park Avenue, and then going into the actual entry sequence where you can kind of see the pathway that leads into the other residential units. And then this is like a kind of like an overall view that you can see from Montana and Echo Park. And then another view from Sunset and Echo Park. And then Sunset from Logan. And then from Montana and Logan as well. And then that's basically it.
So Juan, I'll jump in. I think I think at this point planning is what I perceive on a very quick pass to be an able planning exercise to make sense of an enormous and complex programmatic load on that site. is well executed, and you've made sense of this. And frankly, I mean, we couldn't be looking at two more different projects in terms of their attentiveness to the specific unit kind of requirements and kind of affordances for each of those, you know, for the people living on this site. I do think at this point, planning is trumping architecture a little bit in your scheme. I see where things need to go, but I'm not yet seeing how the whole kind of coheres either into a discrete architectural statement or series of statements, or precisely how it factors into the surrounding urban fabric. And so my thought for you just over the summer, I think, and it's rare that I'm the one bringing up BRK angles in reviews. I'm usually trying to duck references to BRK, but I think BRK has two signal strengths as a designer that he has leveraged into an astoundingly successful practice. One of them, which might help here, is the programming of a roofscape into a fifth elevation. And that was something that came up in the first project we looked at today, where, you know, I think developers love the idea of replacing the ground plane with more programmable and, you know, with an amenity they can charge more for on the roof, or ski down in the case of many of his European clients. So there's how you deal with that surface, which is interesting. But I think he's less frequently credited, but should be more seriously taken for how he deals with the discrete, the kind of pixelation that housing requires to be done well. How you take a logic of individual unit and their accumulation, how they latch into one another and create larger architectural moves. So what I still consider his strongest project of all, The Mountain, one of his first housing schemes, it's remarkable for its kind of urban morphology, but what enables it and what makes it really a profound piece of architecture is how the logic of aggregation and of kind of the resolution at the level of each unit. And that seems to be what you really want to work your way up from. So I would look at architects that share your kind of sensitivity to the minute and discrete within a larger, within the demands of a larger program. Was I on mute the whole time? I might have been.
No.
Awesome. Joe, that was fantastic. 2 for 2.
Can you zoom into one of these, like this one, for example? Just could you zoom in this one?
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I'm actually quite familiar with its block. I mean, if we're talking about the siding, it seems like this side, there's no back, right? Because there were Montanas and Sunset, Logan, and what the other side is Echo Park. So in a way, there is no back. There is no side street.
Just to confirm, we're replacing Walgreens here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Pardon me, Ravina.
In Lassens.
let me ask you one thing. Wong, is that your name? Wong Jong?
Yeah.
Yeah. I look at the project and it feels a little bit like this side here. It feels like there's more of a kind of side street approach to the architecture. Would that be fair to say that? I'm asking as a question because it looks to me that I look at the plan, potentially you could actually embrace that notion that this complex has no back. The back was just there's no back. This is just the interior and exterior. I kind of wanted to see this elevation right here. Where do you have an elevation of this?
No, not on the board, no.
it does seems like in each of your building has side and front. And when I look at all of these renderings, I noticed that there are some that were more privileged as a front, and there are some that was less privileged. And I think that this is a very, very unique situation in the city, where the city itself, this whole block is actually no back, which is, I think that was probably the unique part of the site. I think it was great, you know. But I'm just curious how this proposition, even though you explain where the form coming from, how do you actually explore that through this proposition, through this formal proposition and the concept? And particularly because of your project, you seem to be really much more, as soon as you get those kind of formal construct as a figure ground, you're basically manipulating it programmatically. And so I think that those questions actually seems to be something that it's of your concern, right? Because you're thinking more of a kind of a city planning, the kind of how you engage with all this urban situation.
I am.
Do you understand where I'm going, guys? I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking at all of these renderings. It feels I'm not clear because if you move, can you move further down? Yeah, just keeps rolling down. Yes, for example, yeah, you can stop here 1 second. It seems like this side of seems to engage more of a kind of frontage.
Yeah.
And there's some that was less frontal.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that part of it, I think it reveals a little bit of the weakness of the scheme, even though I think that your scheme could have been able to engage this kind of site. You know, the ambition is there.
Yeah, I just feel I agree with you completely on this, that you're asking for an assessment of how these four sides meet their various frontages, some attunement to how different those frontages are perhaps, but just a clear strategy for frontality, whether it's that Sunset side that sort of obviously needs it or the other three, and especially that back one, which is, I agree, it's a really interestingly lost face for this project that you could do something interesting with. You know, that's the one that would have more of a residential rhyme with its surroundings in many ways. But you know, an architect, maybe one for you to look at over the summer, another one would be James Sterling. You know, I think looking at architects who work in parts but manage to bring those parts together in convincing wholes. That, you know, that I kind of, I want you to take the summer and think seriously about composition and why people isolate the parts they work with and then how they recombine them.
It's funny because I don't know what's happening, but I was thinking of Bofill before, and then you all brought him up. And I think with an accurate assessment, you know, not that I should be ashamed of knowing who he is. But the same here with Sterling. I think that there was both early Sterling in terms of Leicester and late postmodern Sterling, that there were, and in some ways, the kind of kit bash quality that this has is pertinent to both of the ways he put those projects together, that I recognize architectural references, that things that look like buildings, but they're kind of glommed together in a way that a little bit seems, and I mean this in a good way, I mean, it seems a little nonsensical. And it brought to mind this method of adding detail during George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic. When they were doing Star Wars, they needed to make things look like they were more complicated than just styrofoam models. And they came up with this word called greebling, Greeble. And now it's actually, you can actually buy software that will greeble for you. And I thought it was an interesting, and this all goes, I'm assuming you heard the first critique where I asked, basically what it is inherently that you're trying to do with this project beyond the program. So once you answer that, and I'm looking at your diagrams, the black and white process diagrams that are above the two elevations. And it seems a little bit like there is a way of kind of boiling things down to details and then combining them. And this is where the Stirling reference I think really makes sense, is that once you've got these articulated parts, then you kind of kit bash them together to solve problems. Other than that, I don't really know. I mean, I agree with all the critiques of frontages that the project could be about that. And then I'd be a little bit critical about the recess on Sunset versus other recesses on the project. But I am interested in the idea of an assembly of subtly referential literary references, you know, that there's, and then you make a project out of that. But I'm not sure that that's, I'm not sure that that's what you're after. The other
I
thing
think
that,
just
go ahead.
so
Sorry, the
just-
only other thing that came to mind was Petra for a different reason, but.
just going along the lines with all these comments, I think just kind of diagramming through what are those kind of major public moments that are in the project and giving it orientation and kind of direction and scale. And it's again, it's like a study of Stirling probably, you know, kind of how you start to sculpt some of those spaces around the building and with some intention. I think that would be just an assistance here that would really be helpful to kind of guide us through all the parts and pieces just at a high level, rather than kind of dealing with all the aggregation in and of itself.
But I think it's very clear that Juan actually still formulating that concept.
Yeah.
I think that because just the way that he described the project, it was more of a step-by-step way of what he's doing in the studio. So he followed the instruction in the studio as a step-by-step rather than at this point. I think if I would recommend is that maybe the one thing you could look at is that maybe you should just step back and look at more of a kind of retrospectively, what the project is about. And, you know, like sitting outside of the project and look at them rather than just thinking about the sequence of exercise that you went through, you might be able to see the kind of the core concept of the project rather than right now, formally, programmatically, seems like as a result of the first step, rather than it has its own merit or the kind of ambitions of its own. You know what I mean? I think you definitely need some time to really begin to look back, and then maybe you could begin to see the lineage of your project. Whether the lineage of your project is James Stirling or who else, you know, there could be many more precedents for you to look at. But I think that's what all of us need, right? It's I don't really care that much if it is a post-justification, but I think you need it. You need that post-justification to need it and look at the project in such a way that with the fresh eyes, not the step-by-step of the instructor telling me to do.
I think, oh, wait, you're going to say something, Jimenez?
But please go ahead.
Okay. One, so I think what might help me in better understanding your project is hearing from you. I think it would just help all of us. It would help us to hear from you what it is that, you know, again, what it is that motivated you. If there's one, let's say, if there's one thing that, or a couple of things that you could kind of boil it down to that motivated your design process, that fueled it. You know, I'm really curious to know, for instance, why it is that you decided, because my suspicion is that there was a reason for your decision to minimize the setback in that elevation closest to the neighborhood along, I think it's Montana and Echo, right? So you know, what's going on here and what's going on Logan and Echo, I think I'm curious to hear from you why this is such a distinctively different treatment of the street in the project. So, I think that's I think there's a reason. So I guess, my take on, I agree with some of the other comments, but I have this the suspicion that you did decide this for a reason. This formal move was intentional, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about what it is that inspired you in this project. If it's a language of the wall, about perforations in the wall, about some kind of reference to the wall historically. I would be interested in hearing more about that from you, because it does seem so deliberate from my standpoint. And so I'm less interested in in you reformulating your design entirely, right? If you were to continue it, I'm more interested in hearing you just elaborate more on these moves, because it is really it is intriguing to me that you set up this contrast. But again, it was something that I was hoping for right now in your presentation when you speak about it, and I guess with some additional, maybe some additional. I think there was one elevation that was missing that would have also, I think, contributed to that. But I otherwise, I really do appreciate that you, that you took the process, that you did take the process in a holistic manner. But I guess this is the piece that's remaining, that's missing, that I would encourage you to reflect on and to think about moving forward as you tackle other projects in your last year.
We're gonna call this, thank you, Tina, very kind of you. And all the critics, very, very kind of you. Yeah, I think you had some good early work, and if this was mid-review, we'd have a great hope for the future. There is potential in it. I'm just gonna be very honest. It's just, I think we know there's more you probably could do, and you haven't done it, and I don't really know entirely why, and it doesn't really matter at a certain point, right? We're happy to be where we are, and you're happy to have gotten through your final review. And there's some problems which everyone's brought up with the planning. I think Joe made it straightforward and clear. You're working a lot on the planning. I look at it and I go, there's a lot of, someone used the word greebled building spaces that suggest maybe that you haven't quite worked it out in terms of what those open spaces might be in between yet. And there don't seem to be enough of them, in my opinion. So I think there's a porosity issue you might be getting into later when you work it out further. Sections, very helpful tool. Elevations, super helpful tool also as you get into it. So, I think of the planning, there's a lot of ideas there, and they're actually, I think on Sunset, you handle it best. There's like a nice little court space that seems plausibly exciting. The way in which you enter in on the school side, which is not an alley, as Ravi's pointed out, but maybe it's less of anything than the other streets, seems questionable. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Very kind. One more. Jose.
All right, hello everyone. Can you see the presentation board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'll begin by describing the strategy at the scale of the neighborhood. So really my interest was mostly driven by hoping to make this a project that could invite the neighborhood as well as in addition to being what it already the program demands as far as housing. The formal operations that I deployed to do this at the ground plane, for example, at this scale were mostly subtractive on the perimeter to invite individuals into the 4 different housing blocks. Then on the residential floor, on the residential floor with these overhangs that cast shade on along Sunset. The hope again was to just demarc public space along Sunset and in other words, create more public space in the complex. And then on the subfloor, the strategy was mostly creating a bike depot with the primary ramp that I'll go into in this next slide. So zooming in on the strategies again, looking at the ground floor that I was just describing, in the bright green, you'll see the public spaces, public outdoor spaces I was just describing. In that primary ramp as well. And in the orange is the residential space, which I chose to, in the sections that you can most clearly see that vertically they're stacked for the most part, and then they're happening in a very densely around the courtyard, like subtractive move. As far as the communal spaces, those are mostly collectively spread into the additive operations with that I mostly deployed with like conical geometries. And as far as the range of size for those communal spaces, given that most of the smaller units for individuals, for example, and micro units were on the Sunset corner building, that's why a lot of the communal ends up being bigger, for example, than the multi rooms, the 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units on the top left corner. To continue, this is the underground floor that I chose to use as a bike depot, as well as bringing in some of the remnants of the subtractive operations that happened on the above ground, below ground. So treating the first step as a overall subtraction of the ground, but bringing in an additive formal step of those the geometries that were left over from the steps above. And then for the ground floor, these are some of the views that I've been describing so far as that primary entry from the ramp into the underground. And I became interested in creating a lively space along that entryway. So creating more human scaled operations are the ones I've described as both apertures and entryways. And then this is the backside of the site, more residentially oriented, that again is mostly meant to, like the way that these were all divided was mostly to pay attention to the existing transit stops. So the aim was really to create a protected space throughout the whole complex for those who use the transit stops. And as far as the program for this scale was mostly focused on, most of the focus was on public space. So really just making sure that these were either sites for microloans for street vendors or transit ambassadors. For the residential floor, I mostly deployed a singular grid across the whole complex and just saw how I could apply that to create the singular units, the studio units and the micro units. And then on these other blocks more family oriented. So having individual rooms that were all connected by a central kitchen. And then this is the primary view along Sunset Boulevard with the major protected space with the ramps as well. And then these are just some last few sections to show how the collective space is mostly distributed along the above section with the additive operations, and then the residential program is stacked mostly along with the bottom section. Thank you.
Okay. There's something about in any presentation or in any sequence of things, and even the way I used to take tests without studying, you use the test and all the questions that come before to answer the ones that you didn't study for. Not that this is a critique of you, but I'm saying that some of the critique, at least in my mind, is informed by everything we've already said to everyone else and Couch. So I can't look at your project without thinking of Sterling and his disciple, Craig Hodgetts, who I worked for. And that there are aspects in this green drawing, and I cannot get it out of my mind, of the work, early work when Craig and Ming kind of got together about their overlay, the strategy of overlay and composite that they got from graphic design, that they were looking at how Pantone at the time, which was like, you imagine multiply transparency in a Photoshop layer. It is basically how Pantone worked. You take this one sheet of stuff and lay it over another stuff. And then I look at your, and I'm hesitating to overuse the word again, what seems to be Boolean operations, things that you're removing from a mat in order to make something legible. The one very small critique, and I might have something more later, but the big small critique is I think I'm surprised that if you could move, I guess, to your plans, and this is nitpicky, so I get it's not a big point, but I don't understand your big point. Both of these actually illustrate perfectly what I'm hoping to see, but maybe doesn't matter because it's not my project, it's your project. Is that in the removal of this, whatever it is, very legible removal of that, and in the removal of whatever this is as a positive, this is a little bit where, Joe, I'm sorry, but it is Sterling Stott's gallery that I was thinking of. He does the same thing where this hallway goes sweeping around the back and it has to deviate in the kind of Leon Creer way around something. So he makes you very sensitive that something's been removed there because the path moves. What I'm curious about is what is the nature of these facades? If I cut into a geode or a coconut, I do it for a reason, that is to see the inside. And I think there is a potential in the idea of, let's say, fenestrating it. And this is what I mean, like some of this is informed by critiques we've already had. It's prejudiced by those critiques. So you shouldn't take this too seriously. But I'm thinking that there might be a way, and maybe informs the previous project, that the object that we remove from here allows us to treat that material potentially different from that material, and allows us to treat these facades rather than just stacking, opaque parts of the program up against those because they become poché. My critique simply is, I don't think you're, even on the Palladian sense, or the École des Beaux-Arts sense, I don't think you're using poché to its full effect, or the removal of that poché.
I agree with Frank. I do think, I will pick up on a thread of his early comments, which is this looks, I don't want to say half-baked, but it does look like you made a lot of decisions sort of hastily and then have worked probably pretty hard the last few weeks to resolve them. And the toughest challenge you gave yourself was this play between an aggregate, sculpting out of aggregated holes, these large blocks as you meet sunset, and then a part into whole strategy in the back. So you're really you're trying for a have your cake and eat it too project here. And I would say with projects involving housing, you really have to decide, either I've got a big volumetric idea and the challenge is subdivision, or I've got or I've got a really good granular idea, and the question is aggregation, how you add them up. And I think you're trying to do both, and it's showing. And the, you know, just the kind of offsets of walkways, you know, you've got these odd voids, and then the three, whatever they are, the walkway insets to move around them, lead me to think this, you know, the plan we're looking at looks more like more like a challenge than a resolution of the you know, stating the challenge rather than the resolution of the project, which is okay. But I think that's where you're at. If I'm looking at the sunset elevation of your project, as I think I am, that long, you know, to me, it's kind of fascinating how it plays off of the, you know, the challenge you've set for yourself is like the Broad. The way the Broad meets Grand Avenue is with this kind of wave-like, you know, a wave-like cantilever, or in that case, the wave has crested and broken. But the idea of that kind of hydrological form language as it laps up to a major artery in Los Angeles, I think is a compelling challenge to set for yourself. I think it's one of the hardest things to do well in our field. And here it's sort of stated as sort of a casual, like, this will, you know, the way I'm, you know, the way the scale and monumentality of this project is going to be achieved is through this huge cantilever to, you know, to this boulevard. I'd love to see, you know, to make that happen would be really fascinating. But in these plans, we'd see all kinds of traces of the kind of structural, you know, the kind of structural ambition and systematizing that it would require to get anything like that kind of shade space there. And actually, just in terms of making the case for doing it, you should be arguing for shade. It's you know, that's a south-facing elevation. You need the shade. So you've set a challenge that's worth taking on, but I think you got to take it another few steps.
I'm just going to say about something that I thought it was really have great potential, so that the student understand that the project is actually have tons of potential. One is that your approach actually it's not new that it has been done, but it's also have great potential, is that you take the whole block and then you actually manage to create space by the Boolean operation, which is like OMA, right? You take the whole block and you just cut it, you just create space, subtract it with another object, you know, like Boolean it out. And that actually a very, you know, it as equally legitimate operation of the urban condition. I think it's a really interesting one. And it also happening in a section as well, not only just in plan, which I thought that it could be potentially interesting. But I think that the part of the problem for me, it has more to do with that potential hasn't turned into anything yet, because it's still extremely diagrammatic at this moment. And if it is a 20 weeks, you know, I would have loved to see a lot more developed. If one say that it's actually such a huge building and it has a very, very complex operation, you could actually focus on one area to see whether that one area worked in a certain way, right? So for me, at this point, it's really hard to actually critique, because at the conceptual level, I thought it could be amazing. And it could potentially amazing when we begin to understand how light coming in the way that how your Boolean actually allow also the certain light coming in a particular area, and how the section can be varied, and how the kind of seemingly symmetrical condition it's only appear only on the plan, or the kind of, or the certain particular interior. There's a lot of potentials in there. And I thought about people that not only just OMA as a good example, like Ojeti would be a really good example for you, because he used a lot of this kind of subtraction and allow this kind of symmetry to be suppressed inside the interior. And, you know, there's a lot of things that actually was playing the role in the way how the architecture and the building proposition turned into. So anyway, I just have to say that it was just too diagrammatic at this point.
Jose, I would be interested in just to add to the discussion about developing your ideas, developing your design. I'd be interested in learning more about, again, this notion that you propose to draw in members of the community, right? And so as it stands, you know, right, in some of these drawings, you know, I see the block and would be, you know, I would be interested in not necessarily having, you know, a replication of the diagrams that you began with, but I'm right now I'm looking at the concept board, and you know, it's kind of isolated. So I would encourage you to think about, you know, about some of these larger issues that you, I believe, initially started to address. Unless I'm wrong, unless that's not really what drives the project so much. But, you know, I don't know if you got, you know, if you got stuck on this challenge of resolving some of the larger urban issues and the architectural ones. I mean, it seems to me that that's part of it. So maybe take the time to reflect on, again, on taking a step back from your project and taking a long view and think really what is it that motivates this project, so that you can actually see it through, right? And so that you can actually develop the ideas that are important to you, right? In the design. But I mean, as it is, I think that what's more compelling to me are some of the ideas that you started to explore on a formal level. And so if that's really at the heart of your project, then I think it's important that you be able to confront that earlier in the process, so that you can see it through, right? And as as Ravi Varm noted, to be able to to actually to develop the project into something that can potentially reach its potential, right?
Jose, can you go to like page 2 or something? I think it might be page 2. Yeah, no, wait. Maybe 2 more slides. This slide, yes. No, go back one. This plan, okay? I think it's been touched on already. Like, and when Ravi was talking about OMA, I thought how do you say that? Nails on the head or something like that. This is either a very flat TGB or a very thick Agadir, if that makes sense. So I mean, if you're not familiar with either projects, maybe over the summer you can look at the Turkran Bibliothèque, which is a TGB project, which I'm sure you know about. There's kind of receding voids that cuts through the thickness of a cube. So yours is kind of like a squished version of that. What's super interesting about it is, as you animate the voids, the kinds of let's say sectional richness between the levels becomes possible, right? I think typically we deal with these kinds of pancakes that have no porosity between the layers, let alone diagonal porosity between the layers. So there's something there, which is the flattened TGB, but then the thick Agadir, Agadir as the project is, which you can also take the summer to study it. It's almost like a solid void, solid sandwich where there's a kind of void, a sectional void between two or programmatic white versus two layers of programmatic black. Yours is a thickened version of it because yours is almost like you take that sandwich and turn it into some kind of a lasagna sort of layering situation where the complexities of the layers have more of an opportunity to be cut through. So I think, as Joanna was saying, there's a really, really amazing project here that wasn't drawn, if that makes sense. There's a really amazing project in here that you didn't draw. And I can see the traces of the brilliance, but you have to draw it, right? You just need to sit down, trust your hands, trust yourself, and draw it. It's there.
We've kind of come to our end game, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's 4 o'clock. I just realized. Yeah, Joanna, go ahead, and then I'm going to say one thing.
Just
And then
like
we'll
a
go.
really quick comment, because Jose and I have had a bunch of conversations about some really amazing, interesting things that we as architects think about and talk about a lot, from talking about set theory to talking about the status of Peter Eisenman's ground plane in the Berlin Monument, to talking about his family's ancestral home and alternate modes of living, that I think would have been really amazing just for us to have a conversation about and look at and see some of that in the plan. And I know that that all of that's there. And I would really encourage Jose in the future to try to capture some of that more, because I think that there really is a fantastic project here. It just isn't really captured in terms of the drawings and the renderings and the presentation material. So I do want to commend him on some of the thought that's gone into the work this past quarter.
Yeah, so like I was even chatting to Izzy about this too. Jose, I mean, obviously you show up to everything, you're present, you're articulate, you engage in conversation. I've enjoyed our conversations just as much as Joanna, and I think Tina also is going to point that out, and Izzy would say the same. The discourse you engage in is provocative and thoughtful. Some of your ideas, Tina, that you caught too comes from an image he pulled from the farmer's market, even in his first project. And so he's chasing these ideas that are valued. And I think even the way you handled the urbanism, making sort of an entry into the space that was broad enough to carry those kind of ideas, and then subset that out into 4 quadrants, each with a different character. And each character was going to be represented very well by some Boolean space or void, as Ravi pointed out. That's even a Rem Koolhaas idea. And you do diagram it, you draw it. I think the challenge is working on those architectural skills to be able to speak the words you're thinking and the ideas you're having. I don't think it's due to lack of effort, and I don't think it's due to lack of interest or enthusiasm. And I feel like from your first project, where you had these amazing ideas but it didn't quite happen, to your present project, that you actually are progressing and developing in a really nice way. It's just, this is an enormous project, obviously, but at the same time, if I start to look at some of your housing moments or the way you're handling 3 of the quads, you kind of are getting it, and at least in plan, and starting to see how that can happen in section. And so I'm very grateful you were with us this year. And I just want to make that clear too. And I do get excited and hopeful for how you're going to develop as an architect.
Yeah, I also want to add, like we discussed many material ideas, and I think Jose has a good grasp on architectural systems and everything, but it wasn't drawn. But I think he knows how this floor plan goes together, and what are those kind of spatial effects that he's creating through the voids. It's just a matter of kind of getting some perspectives and get that material concept in, and I think it'll come to life, like everyone said, like Jimenez said, Joanna.
And thank you, reviewers, who are still with us past the time. Clayton, Joe, Tina, appreciate it.
Such a pleasure.
My pleasure, Stephen. Yeah,
Thank you, Stephen.
I think you've
Yeah, it's great to see you all.
I think you've outdone yourself with the complexity and you know, just the sheer scale of this one.
This one's a fourth the size of 2018's class, so I don't know. We're shrinking it down every year. So now we're down to 2,500 square feet. We were once 1.25 million or whatever.
I guess it feels big because it's in my backyard.
It's more real because it's 4 stories and it actually is a more plausible, you know, it's not a 70s story skyscraper. Yeah. Anyway, all good. Thank you, everybody. It's been a great day. And thank you, our students still with us.
Yeah,
Thank you,
all
thank you,
really
thank you,
did
thank
great.
you. Juan
Thanks,
too.
everybody.
See you, everybody.
There's Zane. Hey, Zane. Great to see you.
Yo, all the
Are you
room
up
is amazing,
north?
by the way. So good.
Are you back up north or where are you now?
I'm in beautiful San Luis Obispo still.
Oh, you are. Okay. Well, congratulations on graduating. Yes.
Yes, soon. Thank
Yes.
you. Couple days.
Yeah, fantastic. He's one of our former students. Awesome.
Very cool. Thanks, Stephen.
You should go
Thanks,
get a job
students.
over with Clayton at West of West. He could use you.
Yeah, move to Portland. We need people.
Oh, what's the firm called? I'll take a look. I'll take a look right now.
Seriously, West of West.
West of West. All right.
Spain is good.
Yeah, no, he's good. All right.
We'll see you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
I'll see you in the
Thank you,
morning. The
Stephen.
rest of us.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Joanna, thank you. Tina.
Adios.